Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about the experiences children have in youth sport, and we're going to be doing that with Jen Harris. Jen, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on, Dan. It's so exciting to be here. I've listened to your podcast almost right from the beginning, I think, and you've interviewed almost all my research heroes. I feel like a real groupie, and it's such an honour to actually be here and sit beside them, if you like. So thank you so much. It's very exciting to be here.
Well, Jen, thank you so much. I'm thrilled that you've enjoyed the Sports Psych Show. Look, let's start where we always start, Jen. Let's start with an introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your work.
Right. So, well, I think my story starts as a parent, I suppose, in the trenches, if you like. So, my daughter is an elite child athlete, and we have the standard story, I think you would say. She started gymnastics as a toddler, age 2. You know, I put her up to a little preschool class, and she joined a little club champion competition at the age of 4 and won gold at this competition and was invited to join their squad. And her gymnastics sort of snowballed from there. Age 7, she did her first national competition. She was competing internationally, aged 8 or 9, and joined the British team when she was 11. And my story starts back in 2017. So Lily then would have been about 8 years old. And I was at an international competition, and I was sitting in the stands with another mum, and we were chatting about how I best support Lily with her training. And we were talking about all sorts of things, from psychological support, physical support, all sorts of things. And this mum turned to me and she said, "I wish you could help me, Jen, because I haven't got a clue what I'm doing." And for her, it was just a passing comment. But for me, it was a real light bulb moment. And I looked around the stands. It was a big international. There were people have come from all over the world to compete. And I looked around and I thought, my gosh, it's so true. Like, none of us have a clue what we're doing. And so, I popped outside and I was Googling. I jumped onto Google and I was like, okay, well, let me get some help. How can I get some help? So I started to Google, can I find an education program for, my situation, a parent of a high level, very young elite child athlete? And I couldn't find anything. And so this was the beginning of my journey. And to my husband's horror, I quit my job and went back to university. I went to Winchester. I already had a degree in psychology. I'd graduated 20 years ago. And so I went back and did a master's degree in sport and exercise psychology at Winchester. And then I've been very, very fortunate to be accepted at Edinburgh, working with Dave Collins and Christine Nash. Just such an honour to work with them, to do a PhD with the intention of creating and testing an educational programme for parents with children involved in sport. And I am in the final year, so I'm on the rundown, that awful time of having to write everything up. We've done all the research now. The program is built, it's tested, it's all set to go. And really, the intention is to create a program that can be widely distributed and universally effective, applicable for children of any age, involved in any sport, and also at any competitive level. Because obviously, as you know, like as they move through the ranks, actually, pressure comes at all ages, at all stages. So we wanted it to be, really relevant for all levels of competitive sport. Because as you know, in the last, it must be like 15, 20 years, there's been this explosion in research into parenting in sport. And there's so much, as I said, at the beginning, like you've interviewed all my heroes and heroines. There's so much valuable recommendations and advice. And yet there is a lack of connection from that research to the parents in the trenches on the ground. And that's what I sort of felt very strongly back in 2017, sitting in the stands. And I realized, there really isn't support out there.
As in, sorry, just to interject there, because I think that's a really interesting statement to make. As in, there's fantastic research, but that research isn't necessarily being found and utilized at the coalface as a parent, if you like.
100%.
Okay.
That's yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. I think if you look at, um, if say for example, if you look at the way that parents are portrayed, sporting parents, the way they're portrayed, say if you take the media, you do a Google search, sport parents, and they're very much portrayed as like the villains, the aggressive football dads, the pushy tiger mums, and if you look at the message coming out from sporting bodies, there's big focus on coaching and quality welfare and care for the children, but actually very little mention of parents. And I think that not only do we need to change, do we need to get parents educated, but we actually also need to change the rhetoric a little bit and change the message surrounding parents in sport, because the research is now really showing how important they are. The massive impact that they can have on a child's experience of sport. They will impact enjoyment. They will be the ingredient to whether there's success or failure in sport. The full experience of child sport is very much influenced by the parental by parental behaviour. And yet, at the moment, I don't really feel that message is given. I really hope to be able to do some things to change that. And with that in mind, that's obviously I'm introducing the education program, but also, so I've set up my business, Raising Happy Champs, which is not just about supporting parents, but it's also trying to change the image of parents and helping them understand how important they are, and really trying to honor them and make them more the heroes of the sporting world as well. And because they really are, they work so hard behind the scenes to do so much for their children, and I really feel that they aren't honoured as perhaps as much as they should be. So that's really the sort of the focus of what I'm doing now.
Well, exciting time setting up your own business. And I know a lot of what we're going to speak about today is the kind of advice that you're going to be giving out through your company. I talk about today a research project that you've been working on within your PhD. It's a paper that you have co-authored with Professor Dave Collins and Christine Nash. It's entitled Let's Hear It from the Kids, examining the experiences, views and needs of highly committed children involved in youth sport. And absolutely, it speaks to parental involvement, but it also talks in granular detail about the experiences and the needs of highly committed children. So you go into a bit of depth around that. You really do talk about some really interesting stuff in this paper. This is part of your PhD, but part of the broader project that you've spoken to. So can you sort of unpack a bit more the whole research landscape for yourself here?
Yes, 100%, and that's exactly the right way to put it, really, because this I've spoken about how I want to create an educational program, but I think that I wanted to. So obviously, my PhD was about going forward and building that program. This paper was almost about taking a step back and just sense checking: are we on the right? Are we on the right track here? Is this the right recommendations to make for children? Because obviously, if the end goal is about educating parents and supporting parents, and I just wanted to make sure 100% that what is being offered to children and what's being offered to parents is the right thing, and what children get out of their training. Is it valuable? Is it enjoyable? All of those sorts of questions. So it was a sort of the beginning of our research, if you like. So we were looking into that sort of message.
So you've said a couple of really interesting things so far, and I just want to address these because I know people listening in will have picked up on a couple of comments that you've made. I mean, you spoke about this journey started when you sat on the sidelines watching your daughter perform, talking with other parents, and this light bulb moment. Oh, okay, I can research this. I can add some real value to this landscape here. Two comments you made. You referred to your daughter as being an elite child athlete. And you also mentioned experience that she had of winning gold at 4 years old. And I think hopefully you feel comfortable with me bringing these up straight away, really as a forerunner to starting to unpack your paper about highly committed children. But I know a lot of people listening in will balk a little bit at the notion of an elite child athlete. They feel elite and child doesn't necessarily go together, are compatible. And obviously, these days, there's a lot of pushback on the notion of, say, a 4, 5, 6 year old winning gold, and that gold, silver, bronze should be present at that kind of age group. So, if I may, and I love these kind of conversations because I think this landscape is quite complex. Would you have any thoughts to elaborate on those two comments?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I suppose in terms of me describing her as an elite child athlete, I guess it's just semantics, and it's I
Right.
suppose how I suppose I viewed her, and
Mm.
how she's often been described by by British gymnastics, by her experience in sport. I mean, I suppose a child who is competing at an international level at the age that she was, and being on the British team at 11, um, probably does put her into that category, rightly or wrongly. And for us, it has been, I would like to say, it has been a positive experience. I think she would. I think she would agree with that. I hope she would. I understand the arguments against it, and I can see the arguments for it. And I think that that's, and again, that is a big question that is being asked. You know, the value of high level training at a young age. And of course that is the one of the questions that I'm asking in my paper.
Mhm.
Um, and winning medals at a young age, well, I think that there's a lot of you see it a lot in the media, don't you? Or at sports days now, all children all get medals and that sort of thing. And I don't. I don't suppose I have particularly an opinion either way on it. I don't believe in. I do believe that it's great for children to strive for things and be rewarded. I don't think it's a great lesson for children to not for everybody to be a winner. I don't think that's the best life lesson for children to have. I think they're going to get a tough. It's going to be a tough falling back down to earth when you realize that, because the rest of life is about challenges and having to overcome them and not always doing very well. And certainly, that's certainly been our experience of Lily's sport. And I have to say, as her parent, I am far more proud of all the challenges that she has gone through and overcome than I am of any medal that she has won. And that's really, that's my experience. And I suppose something that I want to say is I'm very clear in my mind about, I do have a huge amount of personal experience with, the world of child sport. I work very hard to ensure that my research is not influenced by that experience. This is very much that. I suppose that's why I'm doing a PhD. I didn't want to I could have started Happy Champs and just gone, okay, yeah, I'm just going to sit on social media and wax lyrical about how I've raised one child in youth sport and therefore I know everything. And of course, this is not about my personal experience. That's why I spend time reading the research of like the people that you've interviewed and the greats who work within this the world of youth sport, and they do incredible, and that's why my education program is built upon their recommendations, a little bit on my own research, but this is not about my personal experience. I think my personal experience gives me some empathy on how parents feel. And I think that it has helped me build an education program that is perhaps more uh, that is well received by parents, gives a little bit more understanding from parents. But as I say, it's very much based upon research rather than my personal views.
And I think that landscape is complex, and I think these are difficult conversations to have, and this is why I like to have these conversations, because I don't think these things are black and white.
Yeah,
I When I
definitely.
think of mixing elite with child, those putting those two together, I understand reticence of some people, especially around uh, factors such as early specialization and early seriousness. And we're going to come on to talk about those things in your paper. Absolutely, I understand. But I'm also, and again, speaking to your paper here, also very mindful of the needs, the wants, the attitudes of the children themselves. And I speak, maybe I'm just a case study of one here, but at 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, I took sport seriously, and I wanted to be taken seriously for taking my sport seriously, Jen. I really did. I
Yeah,
didn't want
yeah.
to, and I reflect back and I think of all the wonderful coaches I get to work with now in my work at the Coalface as a sports psychologist. And I think, I did have some good coaches growing up. I also had some very poor coaches growing up, maybe in part because they didn't take their role as a sports coach of a 10, 11, 12-year-old seriously enough, given my seriousness of the sport. So I don't think we can simply dismiss things when a child says, "Hey, look, this is really important to me. I'm taking this seriously." We can't just dismiss it and say, "Well, you're a 10, 11-year old, so this should just be a whole bunch of fun," and we just define fun in one simple way. I don't think I'm formulating a question, Jen, but it's just I suppose it's a neat segue to your research here.
It is interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, but I think also it's quite an interesting argument, and also the way that sport has fallen under the radar. And people really, it has become something that people pay more attention to than perhaps say if. And I have certainly been someone who has received quite a lot of criticism from, say, you know, people asking me whether it was me living out my dreams for my daughter to be a gymnast, and that sort of thing. I have certainly fallen foul to that. But perhaps if my daughter aged 5 had taken up the violin, would there have been the same criticism of me? I don't know. It just seems that sport has fallen as something that should that is perhaps a little bit more focused on than other childhood practices.
Well, let's use this as a segue to talking about your paper here. And you're really engaged in trying to detect the experiences, views, and needs of highly committed children. So I suppose we're speaking to this already,
Yes.
but can you give me a little bit of an introduction there? Why did you want to why did you want to research the viewpoints of the children themselves?
Yeah. So exactly as we have just been talking about, there is a very strong message against youth sport specialization and sort of deliberate practice style training. And we know now that our children's experience of childhood has changed so much in the last sort of 40 years. It's become completely unrecognizable, from children running around in the street, messing around with their friends, playing in the woods at the backs of houses. That sort of experience of childhood has now become very much about organised after school activities, which have in turn further developed into sort of sporting practice, and these these training programs that are becoming more and more arduous, and more and more involved. And as we know, there is this sort of very strong message against them that children should be more involved in deliberate play, and they shouldn't be. And the general arguments against these sorts of training is that, first of all, that there is talk of like sort of physical. It's not physically very good for a child. It's not great for their physical development to just do one sport. They should be doing all sorts of things. You don't want to just play one thing, as well as the sort of long hours. I believe that the isn't the recommendation they shouldn't be doing more hours than their age. I think is
Okay.
the recommendation. That's not actually my area of expertise, so I could be wrong about that. But I think that that's the sort of general
Okay.
recommendation. Then the second argument is that these programs are not enjoyable for the children. The children don't enjoy them, and the idea of taking part in boring, repetitive, over and over training programs is not fun for them. And then I suppose the final sort of question is that, do they actually result in adult success? What is the value of these programs if these children are not ending up um, uh, playing these sports as adults and competing as adults? Then what is the value of involving them from such an early age? And so I suppose this research is first of all not looking into the physical impact on children. That's not what it's about. Just to sort of say, so what we were really looking at was, I suppose, enjoyment and value of these programs. Um, because if you had started to have a look at the value of being involved in sport, and you sort of move into having a look into the research of into sort of positive youth development, and that sort of area of research, um, as this sport is singled out as being incredibly beneficial for children's development, and very much there's this lovely message that sport is something really unique. Even the term magical is mentioned within for the sporting context, that really makes it stand out for children being involved in sport. And I think that there's definitely something to be said for. I mean, your own experience has shown being involved in sport as a child, um, and the argument against whether the children actually enjoy these sorts of training programs. Again, the idea that it cannot be enjoyed. And there's an interesting article published by Gulich et al. In 2020, where they argue that the research against deliberate practice is not underpinned by empirical measures, and the idea that the thoughts and feelings of the children have sort of been assigned to them, words have been put in their mouths, if you like, and sort of much more of what people think the children should be feeling. So, hence the reason for my article, really, just very, very simply, okay, let's just take it back to basics and let's hear it from the kids. Let's ask them. Let's have a look at what their views are. So one of the when I started to do this research, and obviously one of the things that I started to look at is, okay, well, how can deliberate practice be enjoyable? How can it be something that people can enjoy? I mean, of course, mainly most of this research is done on adults, but what is the ingredient to make doing hours and hours of really, really boring training? What makes it fun? And of course, there's this brilliant research into passion being the real ingredient that can make deliberate practice something that is enjoyable. And so what we wanted to have a look at was highly passionate children. So we took the research, that the passion scale by Valorand, and we started, we adjusted it a little bit so it was more child friendly, and then tested the children's passion levels to ensure that they were indeed passionate about their sport. And I think that was very, very important to make sure that these children were themselves reporting sort of a good level of passion towards their sport.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating. And you mentioned passion there, and you mentioned the work of Robert Vallerand. And I'm such a fan of Robert Vallerand's work. I think he's done some amazing stuff. That he's not a sports psychologist per se, but I think his research is very relevant for sports psychologists and for coaches as well. And you mentioned passion. He's actually got a couple of definitions of passion and how these definitions could mediate the experience of deliberate practice. Can you talk a bit more about passion?
Yes, absolutely, definitely. As I say, I think it is. It's lovely research, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I don't know why, but it sort of makes me smile. I suppose because talking, this here today, what I'm talking about is my passion, and any time that you talk about things that we are passionate about, it sort of brings a bit of a smile to your face. So just you talked about the definition of it, so I have written it in the article. I'm just going to read it out because I think
Please do.
not going to spend time reading my article, but so he defines passion as a strong inclination towards an activity that people like, that they find important, and in which they invest time and energy. And interestingly, so what he says was he started to look at passion in relation to deliberate practice style training. And he talks about deliberate practice being by nature demanding, repetitive, and not always inherently enjoyable. But he pulled the two together and and sort of concluded that it is passion that can lead you to be able to enjoy something that he would say is not inherently enjoyable. It is that sort of special ingredient to be able to help an athlete pursue a quest, to be able to attain a performance, giving great amounts of time and energy to enhancing a skill, and just to make it for them, it becomes an enjoyable, satisfying experience. It's the key to energizing them, which I just think is it's a lovely term, isn't it? And much of this research wasn't with children. So of course, I wanted to make sure that we could link that to children. I had no idea whether that would be the case with children, and so of course that again, sort of part of this study was to pull it down to children and make sure that that same conclusion could be made of young athletes as well in terms of sport. Also, there's the dualistic model of passion. So we've got passion in itself, but then you've got two ends of the passion scale, if you like. We've got a bit of a fairy tale going on here. So we've got good and evil. So he talks about harmonious passion and obsessive passion. So, as I say, two ends of the scale. And so harmonious passion is good passion, if you like, for want of a better way of putting it. And that is, sort of the consequence of autonomous internalization of the activity. I suppose you could say intrinsic motivation, for want of a better way of putting it. And on the other end of the scale, obsessive passion is a little bit more sinister, not quite such a healthy passion, perhaps feeling more controlled by the activity, and more down to external desires, and particularly worrying for a child, the desire to perhaps please a parent or a coach, or the need to build self-esteem, or those sort of external motivations. So, this was, very much the start of this research, to connect passion to children in terms of deliberate practice, and also have a look at the influence and the influencing factor of harmonious or obsessive passion. And so, with that in mind, what we wanted to do in this study was, first of all, to test out the children's passion levels, make sure that we were dealing with children who tested, strongly on the passion scale, have a look at their levels of harmonious and obsessive passion. So the first thing that we wanted to look at was the preferences of the children and their experience of their sport, how they felt about it. And secondly, we wanted to look at their perceptions of parental involvement, perhaps what parents should avoid, and what support the children themselves felt they needed from their parents. So, as I say, you've got kind of two sides to this study. You know, the first of all, it's kind of from with the intention of creating the educational program, I wanted to check: are we on the right path here? Are children reporting enjoyment for their sport? Are they okay doing their sport? What recommendations? And with that in mind, what recommendations would I be making to parents who do have children who are highly involved with sport? And then the second objective again is to just give the children a voice. Obviously, as I say, lots and lots of research out there giving recommendations for parental behaviour. We just wanted to check what the children reported and what pitfalls they reported and that sort of thing. I think it's important to say, because it's the elephant in the room, is that we were very aware that working with children can be very difficult. And it's very hard. Like, anybody who's listening to this might be sort of shouting at their phones, going, "Yeah, but what about this?" So I want to sort of say, we were very aware that it is always difficult to get the true picture from children. This study was conducted as a questionnaire online, so the children were asked to fill out a questionnaire online, and we were very aware that we could not 100% say, despite obviously giving them a very clearly written form explaining how we wanted the study to go and how we wanted to hear their views. But we don't know if there were parents standing over them when they filled out the forms. We don't know 100%. We can't 100% say that it was their true views and opinions of their sport. And that is always a challenge that you face when you work with children. I don't think it's a reason not to do it. Of course, you have to always be very careful involving children in research, and it always says that you should only do it if it's really deemed necessary. And I felt that it was very important in this instance to give children a voice and involve them. And we did. We had relatively young children, so they were aged between 10 and 16. I wanted to go as young as I could, I suppose, but obviously you want to just make sure that they are able to understand the what is being asked of them. So we had the cutoff of age 10, and they all had to be involved in some form of competitive sport. It's always difficult because it was important that we measured children across all different sports. So we set a limit of 6 hours, minimum of 6 hours training a week. Obviously, some sports have a lot more hours, but many don't. Many actually have less hours. So we didn't set particularly high hours. I believe that the children averaged something like 11 and a half hours a week was their involvement. And we had a large number of gymnastics. About half of the group came from gymnastics, but the other 50% were from other team and individual sports. And the range was from sort of local all the way up to international, but the bulk of the children were involved with sort of regional and national level that they were training at.
How many participants?
103.
103. Okay. Great. Let's unpack some of the results. Should we talk about the preferences and the experiences first? The perception of arduous, repetitive, specialised training.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this was a mixed method study, and it was really important that we felt it was really important to include some qualitative analysis in here, because I didn't want to put words in the children's mouths.
Okay.
I wanted very much for it to come from them. So the first sort of question that we asked them was a qualitative question. And as I say, it was just simply, is there anything that you do not enjoy about your training? And I wanted to make it as sort of simple as possible. And so what we did was, once we got those replies, we applied some thematic analysis. We finished with 6 themes that the children reported in terms of not enjoying their training. So the sort of the 6th theme, the bottom one, was I always enjoy my training. So, and that was sort of 16 or so % of the group who didn't report anything that they didn't enjoy about their training. So the other 5 sort of negatives that were listed. So 3 of them were as expected. So we had pain during or after training, or injuries resulting from it. Again, that was expected, something that has been reported from, deliberate style practice of training. Training being boring, repetitive, time consuming. Again, expected. And the idea of training stopping them from doing something else, not being able to do another sport, or not being able to, say, play with their friends. That's sort of negative. And then 2 more, which, as I say, it was great that it was qualitative, because then these sort of things came out. So one of them was not feeling good enough, which was raised as a negative. And the final one was personal training issues like bullying and bad coaching. And in terms of, so what we did, sorry, I don't think I said in terms, so that what we did was we measured the passion scales of the children, and then we took the highest end percentages in order to have the high obsessive passion and the high harmonious passion children. And so we had a look at the responses in terms of those children, and it was some interesting things to note. Was not feeling good enough was definitely more experienced by the children from the obsessive passion and harmonious passion. That was sort of erring on that side. So it was. I thought it was great that we got these themes, and the children definitely confirmed what has been reported. The idea of, training can be boring, stops you from doing something else, and it can be painful. And so it was interesting that, these children were not shying away from the downside of their training. They were not, they were acknowledging it and admitting to it. The next part that we did was we asked them very simply, do you accept that? Do you accept that downside to your training? To sort of give them the voice to sort of say, yeah, because everybody we know that there are downsides to challenges in life, and it's just whether or not they would want to change it. And this was very interesting, looking at the full group acceptance levels. If we take the pain during and after, 88% of the group said that they accepted that as a downside to their training. In terms of training being boring, repetitive, and time consuming, 82% said that they accepted that and wouldn't want to change it. The idea of stopping them from doing something else, whether it's another sport or playing with a friend, 90% said that they accepted that. So I found that quite interesting, that the sort of the 3 downsides to being involved in, sort of specialized training was acknowledged by the children, but they reported that they wouldn't want to change it. The concept of not feeling good enough had a lower acceptance rate, just 72%. Still quite high, but it was, sort of looking at that, it was a marked sort of lower number of children that would prefer to not feel like that. And in terms of personal training issues like bullying or bad coaching, only 50% said they accepted that and would like that to change. So it was an interesting, we found that quite valuable feedback from the children. And when we broke out the percentages in terms of the obsessively passionate children and the harmoniously passionate children, the harmonious passionate children had an acceptance rate of 100% across every negative. They never wanted anything to change. The obsessively passionate children also had 100% acceptance on everything except for not feeling good enough. And so, all of these things, when you are seeing this in terms of creating an educational program for parents, I think I feel very strongly that it's very clear that passion is very important. Parents should be aware of the passion levels of their children, and also, if the passion level is becoming obsessive, then it's worth seeing that not feeling good enough may well be a challenge faced by those particular children. So, in terms of what the parents need to do in order to support their children, I felt that these were really valuable results. It is worth saying again, we do acknowledge that the sample sizes were very small, particularly in terms of the harmonious and obsessive passion. If I ever have time, I would love to extend the research and do some further digging into this, because I think it's fascinating in terms of what the picture that it's beginning to paint of sort of children's passion levels, and whether they need different support from coaches and parents in terms of their how they feel and what they need. So that was the sort of first part of the research.
Before moving on to the perceptions of parental support, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on this as a parent of your daughter is in a talent development pathway. I mean,
Mm,
what's your thoughts on the result? What action steps, if any, do you think need to be taken here? Thinking about obsessive versus harmonious passion, and how these two can mediate experiences and that not
mm,
feeling good enough. Did you have any thoughts? I mean, as soon as you said that 72%
yeah.
were okay with that, so that's a lower mark. I mean, I was just
Mm,
three things that came to my mind was the importance of, potentially self-efficacy training, so sort of
yeah.
self-confidence, mindset being a factor, and I know mindset gets a lot of stick these days. The very basic notion of fixed versus growth, but let's
Yeah.
suggest that might be involved in any kind of meaning and explanatory factor here, but also identity. That obsessive versus harmonious. The obsessive side could limit the broadening of human identity, or the child's identity, as opposed to harmonious, which might I can have that sense of harmonious passion and still access a broad range of identities. Those were sort of my thought experiments when I was listening to what
Mm.
you said there.
I think the what I took from it, if as I say, I'm always very careful not to talk about my personal opinion, because I do realize,
Of course, I appreciate
that
that.
it is it's I having so much personal involvement with this world, I have to work very hard to make sure that I am looking at the research,
Yeah,
and not letting my personal views color what my recommendations and my results, if you like. So, but what I looked at it as a researcher, it seemed to me that as parents, um, there is, if we are looking at the challenges faced by our children, and where we really need to make sure that we up our game and make sure that we provide the best support, is in terms of personal training issues, bad coaching, and bullying. And I think that you've seen that, we've seen that in the media. It's been obviously very widely publicised in the last few years, of challenges faced in sport by children not having positive
yeah,
experiences due to
yeah,
coaches, and bullying, and bad experiences. And I think that any educational program needs to empower parents and make sure that I think that a lot of the challenges are faced because parents often feel like they can't step in, that they are not given, the sort of, they feel that they don't want to interfere. And I feel very strongly that shows the importance of giving parents a voice and helping them feel that as long as, as long as they are along, as long as they know what their role is, and that they should be able to step in if they feel that there is a problem. And in terms of not feeling good enough, I think that certainly for parents, of course, what we don't know is who is the child feeling they're not good enough for. Is it themselves?
Yep.
Is it their coach? Or is it their team? Or is it their parent? And we know from the research that a lot of children um, feel that they're letting their parents down. That is something that has come up time and time again in past research. Children wanting to please their parents, wanting to do well for their parents, and parents, sort of stepping in as sort of pseudo coaches and being overly involved with training. And so I suppose from my perspective, when I have tied that into my educational program, and what I say to parents when I'm teaching them, I say, you can't control how they feel about themselves and their team and their coach, but you need to make sure 100% that they know they're not letting you down. That's the bit that you can control, and that can be a real shift in parental behavior and an understanding of the impact that parents can have on their children. Sort of following competitions. I talk a lot about communication following a competition, and that sort of, sometimes parents always not meaning to. This is always good intentions, but sort of trying to perhaps deconstruct what happened in the competition, and with the intention of being helpful. But actually, of course, the minute you start deconstructing as a parent, perhaps that gives the message to the child that the parent thinks you didn't do a good enough job. And that is, of course, what this is showing, that even with all the passion in the world, they don't mind the long hours, they don't mind the pain, they don't mind the fact that they can't play any other sports, but they don't want to feel like they're letting mum down. And so that that to me was really powerful, and something I felt like we could really move forward and make sure that message is put across in the education program.
And that moves us on neatly to
Yes,
the second
it
set of
does.
results, perceptions of parental support. So unpack that a little bit for us, Jen.
Yeah. So again, this was again two sides. We had both qualitative and quantitative elements of it. So the first thing we did, similar to the first one, was asking about parenting pitfalls. Could the children identify anything that their parents do or say that they don't like, that they're not happy with? Now, we were not expecting a huge response to this. It's very hard for children to throw mum and dad under the bus. It doesn't come sort of, although I know my kids seem to be very happy to continuously tell me what I'm doing wrong, but generally, so we weren't expecting, but we were hoping to get some insights into this one. And we got 4 themes out of this. The first one, which was nearly 60% of the kids, said nothing bad to report. And then we had the second most prevalent one, which was coach type talk, pushing, and sort of technical advice.
Right.
The third one was complaining about time and family, financial commitments. This has cost me so much money, and all of that. And then not appreciating how important my sport is to me. Which interestingly was very much from the obsessively passionate children. That was one that really came across from them, not appreciating how much my sport is, how important my sport is to me. And I think that's something that you alluded to as your experience as a child of sort of perhaps people not understanding how important it is. So that was a nice insight. I think it was lovely to see that the children were not saying that. Most of the time they said that their parents weren't doing anything wrong. As I say, whether it's because the parents aren't or because the parents didn't want to report it, I thought it was, it is in keeping with the message that the majority of the time parents are not these villains that's portrayed in the media. They are just generally doing their very, very best for their children. They're not supported very much. They're not given much guidance on what they should or shouldn't be doing. But in the majority, they really are doing their very best. something that came out, one quote that I actually put in the article because I thought it really epitomized the challenge of the parental role in sport and how difficult it is. One child, when asked, what sort of things do your parents say that you don't like? And this child replied, how was gymnastics today? And I just thought, it really, really shows what a challenge. Like something that is just the most innocuous
Yes.
question has actually been pinpointed as the one thing that they really, really hate. And I think that just it demonstrates how difficult it is
Yeah.
to get it right, and again the need for an education program for parents. So I that quote really sort of made me smile, and I did pop it in the article because I felt like it should be noted. Um, and then the final quantitative element of the research was getting children their preferences for parental behaviour. And so what we did was we gave them 10 parental behaviours and asked them to rate them on the Likert scale, 1 to 7, 7 as being very, very important to them and number 1 not very important. So this wasn't about ranking them. They didn't have to choose one as more important than the other. All 10 of these behaviours could have been a 7 if they wanted. And what I did was I took recommendations from research.
Okay.
I also added in a few little sense checkers. Obviously, going back to the first part of the research was talking about whether children really wanted to be involved in long hours. And so I added in a few tests, if you like, because again, as I said at the beginning, it's very hard. Sometimes it can be very difficult for children to say, I don't like the long hours. I would rather not be doing it, and not admit to it, perhaps if their parents are sitting with them. So I gave them a few little, popped in a few behaviours that could give an indication that the children were not so comfortable with their training. So those were helping them miss training, the idea
Yeah.
of sort of calling in sick, if you like, wanting them to always encourage training. And also sort of prioritizing participation, kind of changing the family calendar around to make sure that they could
Mm.
always take part in their training. So those were my sort of little testers, just to see how the children would respond to that. The rest of the advice almost exclusively came from recommendations and research. As I've said, there's so much brilliant research that's been done. We did add in a couple that we wanted to test. So the first one was the expression of pride. I find it quite interesting how this isn't mentioned very much when it comes to recommendations for parental behaviour. I don't know if it's something that's just taken for granted. We just take it for granted that parents will say that they're proud of their children. But I feel very strongly that if you're going to put together an education program, you don't take anything for granted. If it's a really obvious thing to say, I still feel it's really important that it should be said. So I popped in the expression of pride. And the second one that we added in was respect their love of the sport. And in fact, this had already come up from the children saying, they don't respect how much I love my sport. So we just added that in. And interestingly, when you look at the results, actually the expression of pride for the whole group came out as number one. Most important thing for the children was that their parents said they were proud of them. Of course, that ties back into not feeling good enough. And you hope that by giving parents the recommendation to make sure that they tell their children how proud they are of them, that might help in some way mitigate the feelings of not being good enough. As I mentioned, we can't change how they feel about their coach and their teammates and for themselves, but just to make sure that they know that mum and dad are really proud of them and that they are good enough for mum and dad.
Mm.
Um, in terms of the harmonious and obsessively passionate children, interestingly, they actually put respect their love of the sport as number one. And the expression of pride for them came in a close second. And that was in keeping with the point that it was the obsessively passionate children who noted that not appreciating how important their sport was in the qualitative element of the research. So that sort of reflected that. In terms of my little tests as to whether or not the children were committed to the long hours and perhaps wanted to have an excuse to get out of training, help them miss training was 10th. It was very definitely right down at the bottom of the list. And I found that to be encouraging. I felt, it gave the children a chance to mention that perhaps they might like to be able to miss training every now and then. But it just, again, was not something that came up as being important. And my other little tests of prioritizing participation and always encouraging training came in as sort of 4th and 5th. So again, was seen as important that they were allowed, that their parents would encourage them to train. Because we all know, I'm keen weight trainer, but it's still tough for me to go to the gym. It's good to have. They always say how great it is to have like a gym buddy or someone who can support you and cheer you along. And everybody often can feel like they might not be up for training. So the idea of having your parents to encourage you was put as as 5th. So this gave some really, really great results in terms of what we would be putting in the education program, and some really sort of I felt sort of powerful message coming from the children as to what their views of their training, as well as what they felt they needed from their parents.
Really interesting stuff. And as I suppose to close the conversation here, just some reflections from yourself as a researcher on your findings there with regard to the children's perceptions of parental support.
Probably the most powerful message is the expression of pride coming from the children wanting, and as I say, this really ties into if we recall at the beginning, only 72% of them accepting not feeling good enough. So that message of really needing to feel like like they were good enough, and perhaps there is the idea that if they felt that their parents were proud of them, then that might help to mitigate that sort of negative feeling. And in terms of the message from the children regarding being involved in long hours of training that can have pain and stopping them from doing other things and quite boring training, just the general message does not seem to be that they don't want to be involved in it. And as I say, we're very clear that these children did score highly on the passion scale, and they are very committed to their sport, which is a great thing to see. And I feel that in terms of saying that these children may not result in adult success, whether you can view that as a negative. I sort of I reading what they wrote about their sport and their obvious commitment to their sport, it reflects back to the research into positive youth development, and how having that sort of commitment and developing resilience in the face of a challenge, I feel it. You can't deny that must be a positive experience for a child. And even if they decide, at whatever age, we know that children start to drop out as they become late teens, and other things, other passions take over, and the fact that they would then be counted as perhaps they didn't continue that sport into adulthood, and therefore it would be seen as a sort of negative mark against them. But I feel if you take a snapshot of how they were feeling at that one moment, that high level of commitment, the desire to to achieve and do well in the face of challenge, I feel that is a really commendable experience, and something that should not necessarily be taken away from the children.
Super interesting, Jen. And my final question, therefore, is where next? Where next with this line of research?
Well, so as I say, my education program has been designed. We've done 2 rounds of testing. And so it's called the Super P approach. I've got a little acronym there, and I hope to get my PhD and become Dr. Jen. And then, as I say, this is a passion for me to try and see if I can make this program as widely available as possible. Generally, the results and the feedback from the parents has been well, actually, very humbling from my perspective to hear them say such positive results. And I did some interviews of parents, and parents talking about how helpless they felt, like some really negative language. I felt helpless, and talking about those moments of desolation when you don't know what you should be saying, and then hearing how reassured they felt when they took my education program, and reassured and sort of supported, and the lovely idea as well of feeling more relaxed, that they could relax a little bit more, knowing that they were on the right path. And as I say, yeah, it's very heartwarming and reassuring to hear them give such positive feedback.
Brilliant stuff, Jen. Fantastic to speak with you about this. Such an interesting line of research. And I know you'll be excited about starting your new business. So how can people find you, follow you, and get in contact with you?
So yes, well, my business is Raising Happy Champs, and my website is raisinghappychamps.com, and you can email me through the website, or info at Raising Happy Champs. I'm also starting out on social media. I have to say, it's not something that comes naturally to me. I'm terrible. It's our age, isn't it? I'm terrible with social media, but I'm there on Instagram and Facebook, again, as Raising Happy Champs. I've just started TikTok, which is just so beyond me. I really, I'm really delving into the unknown there. I am on X as Raising H Champs, but I have to admit I'm not very present there. I know many of you are, so I feel if I get a bit more of a following, then I'll start to post the message out on X. But at the moment, it is more Instagram and Facebook.
Well, I suggest everybody does follow you, because this is such an interesting line of research, and I know you're going to add enormous value to so many people out there who are challenged by this area. Jen, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. It's an honour to be here.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you think of the Sports Site Show. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook, or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.